Hello and welcome to all to this webinar titled The Call to and the Ban on Reproduction, Embodiment at the Crossroads of International Psychology, which is hosted by APA Division 52 International Psychology. This webinar is part of an ongoing series to celebrate activities of psychologists around the world to provide useful information for international engagement and to encourage us to take a broad and global perspective. My name is Pina Marsico, and along with Luca Tateo are your co-hosts for today's webinar. And before we begin, our online audience have the ability to ask questions by typing them in the chat box located at the bottom left of your screen. Please feel free to type your questions during the presentation. Luca will be making note of them, and during the last 10-12 minutes, he will present them to our guest speaker. At this time, I will introduce and welcome our guest speaker, Rossella Traversa, is Assistant Professor of Psychology at University of West Georgia, and the body as a test of power is central to her current research agenda on pleasure and pain dynamics, as well as on her new approach to mortality. Thank you for being with us, Rossella, and please, the stage is yours.
All right, so just a second. Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity to share this presentation today. Thank you especially to Dr. Luca Tateo and Dr. Pina Marsico for giving me just this incredible opportunity to discuss with members and non-members of Division 52 of the American Psychological Association today. So I'm going to introduce this presentation about the call to and the ban on reproduction, as I called it, by mentioning some of the crucial aspects related to an important political theorist and philosopher, Carol Patman, regarding the very roots of our modern society, which Carol Patman discusses are not related to the social contract as an abstract idea that comes together with the assumption that there is a mutual agreement between different individuals making free choices and agreeing with each other to stay together and to maintain the civil order. But Carol Patman pinpoints how actually what keeps society together and existing is what is unwritten, actually. It's not the sort of contract that we usually think about, but it's rather the so-called sexual contract. So as she says in this quote that I selected for this introduction, incapacity itself is politically significant because it represents all that the civil order is not, all that is encapsulated in women and women's bodies. So the body of the individual is very different from women's bodies. And here I am introducing something that is a kind of conflict between who is the individual and who is a woman. That will be a recurring theme across this entire presentation. So his body is tightly enclosed within boundaries, but women's bodies are permeable. Their contours change shape and they are subject to cyclical processes. All these differences are summed up in the natural bodily process of birth. So what Carol Patman has been arguing with the idea of the sexual contract is basically this question. So what do we agree when we become citizens in a country? Which are the untold and unsaid implications of the civil order and every kind of legislation? And every time we say I do, as if in a marriage contract, which is not even named as such. So every time we marry the state, what are the assumed and silent, tacit implication. So in this specific case, what do women and people with the ability to get pregnant really become committed to when they become citizens of a country? So as I said, does not exist a marriage contract, as Carol Padman argues, named as such, because when we say I do to each other in any kind of marriage, encounter agreement, what comes actually unwritten is exactly the status of the body, the embodied relation with which we become committed to each other. In other words, the sexual property that we share with another partner. And I want to also stress this aspect by mentioning the basic modern democracy principle that comes back to the 1679 writ, habeas corpus ad subsistendum, that has to do with the idea that the modern democracy has been built up over the idea that you will be supposed to have a body to show, to be eligible to rights and to exist. But actually, what is the specific status of the body is yet to be verified and totally clear. So, which is the historical context where I am positioning this discussion today? For sure, this discussion came and was inspired to what happened this summer in the US. So, the overturning by the US Supreme Court of the historical decision, Roe v. Wade, in light of the global reproductive scenario. So what I'm going to cover in this discussion today with you is how to make sense when we talk about reproductive rights, when we talk about abortion, how do we make sense of the body? Which is to say, how do we make sense of the real and potential borders, boundaries, as we just said with Carol Padman's idea of lack of boundaries in women's bodies that make them less of an individual. So in this case, in this line, I would also like to unpack a little bit the usual rhetoric, the usual narrative that comes together with the reproductive rights debate. That is the idea that we need to reclaim freedom of choices. So what does this exactly mean? So my approach to choices here are borrowed from McClellan and Fine, where they argue that choices actually are never made independent of history and politics. So they are always located in a broader context and scenario, both outside and also within communities, homes, as well as bodies. So we're just starting to see how this idea of body itself is always individual and collective at the same time. And I'm also going to cover a little bit different areas of sacredness. Why am I using this idea of sacredness when discussing the basis of the civil order? In this sense, I am absolutely searching for a discussion that covers both the terminating pregnancy rights as well as the issue around the forced sterilization practices. And the case studies that I'm going to discuss briefly and in their major crucial components in this regard are taken actually from Italy, the US, China, and Israel. So as a way of introducing this main topic, I'm also going to address especially our audience that are among psychologists, clinical specialists that deal with women that are trying to get an abortion, and in general with women and their partner that are dealing with family planning. So the role, what is our role? Which is the role of biotechnologies in actually giving information condition for the sake of women's freedom of choice. So are we neutral agents here, or is actually such an agency much more extended and should be subject to public debate? So as it's visible in this excerpt that I took from a clinician that has been discussing the implication of ultrasound, this one of the latest biotechnologies that we use actually to predict some future, for instance, structural abnormalities of the fetus. This is really giving us information about the extent of uncertainty that this kind of technology and this kind of information can provide us, just once again challenging our ideas of neutrality and always positioning us as specialists that are always taking decision, not merely leaving women and their partner alone in their making choices between what's the value of women's choice and what's also what could look like, what does look like a good society. So as Ben says in this quote, so we could always see these brain hemispheres really clearly, but if there was a sort of a gap in here, we call it hypoplasia of the vermis, which is a Dandy-Walker malformation in simplistic terms. So babies were being terminated for that condition, and that probably between 5 and 10 years ago, someone said that when there's this gap here, it's not always hypoplasia of the vermis. So we already see the agency in this very phrasing of babies were being terminated. So later on, it says, so it's a slight variation in development, but not a structural abnormality, as it turned out to be with later exams and research findings. And then we started looking at it more carefully, both on ultrasound and fetal MRI, and this person sort of defined a way for deciding which it was. And so we became aware that, in fact, probably some of those babies that we terminated over the years didn't have such a terrible condition. So the fluctuating research finding and the use of our biotechnologies, together with the information that we give, are never neutral in this regard. A couple of fundamental concepts for this presentation are biopower and biopolitics. They both position, especially the discussion over abortion, especially crucially sensitive because it's a matter of selection and non-discrimination. So what's the importance of abortion in this case and the narrative around reproductive rights? These are some of the questions that I've been asking myself throughout my research career so far that I'm going to share with you today. Does the termination of pregnancy contribute to the singularization of humanity? So is this idea of individual freedom of choice has to do with a lack of attention to the broader context that co-shapes our decision making? And also this, current use of ultrasound images, the ubiquity of such a use, is being actually creating a new biopolitical status for the fetus that is exchanged. Their images are being circulated among our beloved ones, family, and even posted on social media. So being given a social profile. So this being said, who and what actually embodies bare life in Agamben's terms? So bare life being a concept much more similar to Zoe than bios. Zoe being only the idea of a biological life that is still not enjoying the fully political and social rights. So who or what actually is at stake in being a mere biological entity? The woman, the people in general with the ability to get pregnant, or the fetus? And here the sacredness that I'm pointing to has to do with an arena of the defenseless, the separation from the living being arena that we usually are familiar with, and the idea of destiny. Again, I'm borrowing the anti-abortion and pro-life vocabulary in this case by asking who is actually in and out of such a sacredness arena. ultimately, what constitutes and does not constitute a pregnant body? So if we locate the very idea of motherhood, the very idea of reproduction into a specific part of the body, into a body, we should actually ask this question: what makes the pregnant body different from, for instance, the mouth? So the mouth, which is not being attached, what I call the natural sacredness, like it happens with the uterus or with the vagina. Usually the mouth is considered a multifunctional organ, so it can be seen as playing harmonica or eat, whereas when it comes to uterus and vagina and the belly, they are always immediately seen as reproductive organs, so which one only function. But nonetheless, if we accept that giving birth is a choice, what I'm asking also to all of you today is why the future, so the potential of a sentient being, should be a woman's major concern rather than a priest's celibacy concern. The first case study that I'm going to discuss with you is actually taken from a study that I personally conducted in Italy in 2014. And here I selected a couple of quotes as very vivid example of the situation, the position of reproductive rights in Italy. So with the first quote, this was an interview with a 40-year-old woman who actually has been struggling to get an abortion. What I wanted to pinpoint is the belly as an example of a highly embodied struggle when it comes to the choice of pregnancy. So I asked this woman, tell me if I have understood you correctly. You approach your body thinking something like, I don't even want to feel it. I don't want to feel my body. And this is what she replied me. Sure. I didn't even want to look at myself in the mirror because it was something annoying me. And then my breasts were growing and this annoyed me too. I mean, I couldn't bear the natural transformation of a pregnant woman. In the past, I used to say, look, beautiful, the belly is growing. Not this time. It annoyed me. Emphasizing the belly, I like to do it in the past. I tried to hide it this time. So the very idea of separating the choice over one's body from women as individual is really something that ethically and politically should be a major head up for all of us, also as psychologists. And then it comes the most crucial aspect related to the present and the amount of conscientious objectors, doctors among the healthcare staff in Italy. So here in this excerpt, I asked today's interviewee, what made you feel worse during the present experience of abortion in comparison to the previous pregnancy? And she said, I was at another hospital and I had to leave it since there were conscientious objectors. Because even though I was suffering from sepsis, the baby could still be alive. And if I decided to give birth, I would have to kill him. Some tragic events, you know. Then they brought me there since I was supposed to talk to a psychologist. I was suffering from sepsis, fever, and 20-day hemorrhage, but they did tell me, to me and my husband, that we were supposed to talk to a psychologist due to procedures. I experienced hell. There was no room. They put me in a repository. Then they didn't pay attention to anything. They put the fetus still alive just next to me, and I turned my head to the other side. At the end, they put me in a place with other women and their newborn babies. And this was the worst thing of all. So clearly what we just read from this quote is actually a number of violations of the existing law in Italy regulating abortion. There is a so-called 194 that was passed in 1978, which kind of prescribes a 7 days reflection period after doctors release their certificate of pregnancy, during which no women are actually required to ask for a psychological counseling. So it's totally up to women. Moreover, their partners should never be included if it's not a specific women's choice. And what is more, this 7 days reflection period never apply in dramatic physical emergency cases, like in this case, where there was sepsis and 20-day hemorrhage. So the entire discussion over abortion, as also was observed by many feminist psychologists, and as it emerged in the 6 years ago special issue, the Feminism and Psychology has dedicated to this issue, to this topic, there has been a lack of research on the very psychological effects of denying abortion to women who were asking about it. On the other hand, there was also an attempt to consider and propose the existence of so-called post-abortion syndrome. Well, all those studies that have been trying to draw a clear connection, cause-effect connection between a safe abortion and subsequent mental health disorders for women who got an abortion had a number of methodological problems, ranging from the sampling, the use of some specific distorted clinical evidences, up to using actually also a misinterpretation of evidences, especially when it came to use this cause-effect explanation. By the way, on the basis of the literature that we have right now, there has been no significant differences between the mental health outcomes in the long run for women who received an abortion and women who were denied an abortion. So such a cause effect between a safe abortion and later mental illness has never been proved so far. By the way, no abortion happens in a vacuum. So this is important when it comes to emphasize that abortion, even the painful experiences of abortion, never made sense outside a broader consideration of what are the values in a specific society regarding motherhood, sexuality, and women's freedom of choice. The second case study that I'm going to share with you is from China. So here we have a very interesting different side of the coin, different perspective on reproductive rights. So there has been a huge problem in several decades ago and still ongoing about the so-called sex-selective abortion, and more specifically, the dramatic drop in female fetuses rates, and in general terms, in demographical terms, when it came to the presence of women versus men in the Chinese society. And here we have a clear example of this clash between a biopower level that has to do with approaching this topic from a women as species, so the governmental population control, versus looking at the reproduction itself as a biopolitical level. So as women as bodies, in other terms, women as individuals and capable of making choices. So here, the way the government in China has been trying to abolish actually this practice of sex-selective female or sex-selective abortion has been actually through criminalization of this very practice. And criminalization is a key term when it comes to discuss reproduction in China. But my question here is, such a criminalization of sex-selective abortion going towards women's self-determination? Is exactly this the issue at stake? The criminalization happened at different levels. So criminalization of safety in terms of regulating the access of births. And here the women's bodies, interestingly, were seen as both the side for making a choice, as well as the side for potential offense for female fetuses themselves. Because women were seen, and are still seen as also potential perpetrators of such selective abortion. Then there was the criminalization level in terms of authority, where does it fall, the authority, the legitimization to actually counter this practice? Does it rely upon the family or the state? Whilst actually they both co-construct the context of the daughter deselection. What is important and remarkable actually to say is that the criminalization of sex-selective abortion in China has been proved unsuccessful because it has been trying to modify, to shape the women's bodies level without changing actually the structural patriarchal context that actually makes the daughter deselection possible. And another important point here is that the women's movement in China, differently from other women's movements elsewhere, has never really prioritized access to safe abortion as a key cause for concern. So has never actually worked towards the women's freedom of choice, but always, worked towards the women as species level, so the population control. The one-child policy was another component that made possible this idea that women were expected to undergo abortion in order to be good mother subjects in the Chinese state building project. And this propaganda, this narrative about the connecting women with the national identity is going to be also discussed in the Israel case, but I would say it's underlining all 4 case studies sharing with you today. So because actually reducing fertility was considered to be a common good in this broader and mission of the Chinese state building project. And in this scenario, sons were essential in order to keep the birth rates down. So that's why also it was kind of tacitly accepted, the daughter deselection. At any rate, fetal sex identification and sex selective abortion are now more difficult to control. And actually, what I said before, the failure of the state criminalization of what could be also named different family planning led to what we know now was the 2-child policy in 2016, just always as a top-down governmental policy in order to push the population and families to increase the birth rates and hopefully to abolish the sex-selective female fetuses abortion. Now we come to the case of the US. And here I wanted to highlight which was the context previous to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. So which was the scenario here that actually brought us to this last summer overturning. So first of all, there has been a dramatic drop in abortion rates in the US over the last few decades, as well as decline in birth rates. And this is going to be very important when we will discuss about the implementation of different restrictions across different US states, even when Roe v. Wade was still in force. One explanation has been that medical abortion also replaced surgical abortion in important amount, to an important extent. So for instance, the Mifeprex was approved by the Food and Drug Administration in 2000, and already by 2011, up to the 23% of all non-hospital abortion were medication abortion. So this was one explanation why there has been a dramatic drop in abortion rates. On the other hand, we cannot really say at the current stage of the literature, of the research, whether or not restrictive state laws have been successful in reducing the abortion rates because for sure, there has been a number of difficulty using, for instance, a number of policies that were actually intended to regulate, to restrict the abortion rights. For instance, keeping abortion as out of pocket from private insurances, and also making it difficult for low-income women to access abortion, because there has been a drop in state funds with respect to abortion, as well as requiring counseling for couples and also parental notification for minors. But we still do not know whether it has been proved successful in decreasing the abortion rates, also because all these policies were intended to increase the birth rates, which, as we just saw, didn't happen. So another important aspect of the pre-Roe v. Wade scenario in the US has been that there was and there is an ethnic specificity in the lack of access, of equal access to reproductive rights. So for instance, African American, Latina, and poor women generally have and still have had and still have higher abortion and unintended pregnancy rates than do non-Hispanic white women and women with higher family incomes. And even if we take aside the element, the component of the income, there's still the ethnic component that makes a difference between those who access and lack of access to reproductive rights. So many feminist psychologists have been started to ask why there has been such a lack of attention, both in scientific and political terms, with respect to abortion, even if we compare abortion to other civil rights, for instance, gay marriages or other LGBTQ issues and rights. And one possible explanation has been that abortion is seen in terms of policy as a problem primarily affecting women with low incomes and women of color. And usually all those people, women that are outside, non-visible, not included in the mainstream media and political institution arenas. This is not to say that all LGBTQ folks that actually gained important rights are all from white and upper classes, but still the representation of these rights has gained more visibility in mainstream media and political institutions. And this is also something to think about. So another possible explanation has been that religious and social conservatives really see abortion, first of all, as a murder, so as killing, the action of killing someone who is already given the status of a person. But not only this, this is an intentional murder. And here I see, and I propose to all of you, this is where it lies the very idea of addressing and accusing women's exercise of freedom of choice over their body. Because if it's seen as an intentional murder, it's what is under accused is and criminalized is exactly the intentional choice made over women's bodies. The last case study that I'm going to discuss is about Israel, and more specifically the forced sterilization practices that have been enacted in Israel to protect the so-called purity of the Jewish state. So in 2013, the then Israeli Deputy Health Minister Yaakov Litzman openly admitted that Depo-Provera contraceptive shots have been administered to Ethiopian immigrant women without their consent. So there is a whole controversial history around these contraceptive shots that have never been approved, even here in the US in the 60s and 70s by the Food and Drug Administration, but still during those decades have been administered in an experimental way to a number of minority women, so Black women and poor women. So this kind of contraceptive have been also proved to have some sort of connection with subsequent now wanted but forced hysterectomies and breast cancers and other fertility issues. So the practice of coercively injecting Ethiopian women with Depo-Provera is about reducing the number of births in a community that is Black and mostly poor. So the unspoken policy here, once again, is that only children who are white and Ashkenazi are wanted in Israel. So the very idea of using women's reproductive capacities to build up the new Jewish state, the new Jew, has been forced upon Ethiopian immigrant women while they were conducted from Ethiopia towards Israel during one of the two of the most important operation of unifying Jew people from all over the world and bringing them back to the state of Israel that Israel has been undergoing in the past several decades. And here, the ideal of the new Jewishness is really the white European body politic that is central to build this new national identity. So whitening the new Jew is essential. The new Jew that is the European is being conducted against, which was historically the Palestinians that have been surrounding the state of Israel, as well as the Ethiopian Jews. So briefly, what I'm going just to conclude about the case of Israel, which is very interesting in terms of different narratives that have been used to white Jew people, women, and Ethiopian immigrant Jew women. So first of all, David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, said, "The increase of the Jewish birth rate is not an imperialistic need, but rather an essential component of the survival of the Jewish people. Any woman who does not have 4 children, as much as it depends on her, is betraying the Jewish nation." And let's have a look at the difference between this narrative and what has been told to immigrant women. And it came out of from a 2012 TV program, Israel Education TV program called "Where Did Our Children Go?", where there was this Ethiopian woman that has been narrating what she has been told in a number of transit camps towards Israel by some Israeli representatives. She was in tears while saying that, reporting that they said that you don't need to birth many children. People who have many children will suffer. You will have to work in Israel for food, for your food. It will be hard for you economically if you have a lot of kids. So here, what I would like to emphasize is really the idea, the eugenic attitude of such a difference in population control and reproductive control. Always from this TV program, it came out how the nurse stated that the Depo-Provera is given primarily to Ethiopian women because they forget, they don't understand, and it is hard to explain to them. So it's best that they receive a shot once every 3 months. Basically, they don't understand anything. So the eugenic attitude, it really comes from this idea that it's especially due to their race that these women should be restricted, hyper-regulated, and especially they should be regulated for the sake of regulating how many they could become as Black immigrant Jews in the new Israeli state. So Black people are unfit for Israeli citizenship, yet they should still be alive, but cannot live as full citizens or outnumber, more importantly, the Ashkenazim. And here it is absolutely visible, the Foucauldian idea of not only biopolitics as a form of regulation of death, but also as a form of regulation of life itself. So as a way to conclude, I would like to really pinpoint what the anti-abortion position for me entail. They their position fixate what is actually the essential quality of living beings. And this kind of quality really relies upon the genetic heritage, which is usually to say that relies upon human genetic heritage, without actually explaining which are the differences between human and other species in a number of regards. For instance, such a difference is not, unfortunately, that sharp, because if we take the usual rhetorical parameters to distinguish humans from other species, such as rationality, freedom of choice, etc., we can see that a lot of people, for instance, also people with special needs, do not fall into this classification of humanity, but they still, fortunately, are considered humans, until the point that a fertilized egg cell with an immature nervous system to feel any kind of sensation of pain and pleasure, at least within the first 18 weeks, is valued more in this narration, in this position, than any other sentient life, such as a sentient old non-human animal. And then it comes the discussion conclusion over ethics. So if we consider ethics in our political decision makings as something that should be based on equality and justice, ethics itself cannot rely upon the concept of nature that, as I've been trying to discuss across this presentation, is always a politicization of nature. So ethics should not be an example of abstract search for good, but rather a search for the care of the senses. In other words, what I called sensual ethics. So taking care of sentient beings that are subject to feelings of pleasure and pain. So this should be the very basic unit to construct any ethical ideas of equality and justice. So without still transcending bodies, as it is usually done, especially in Western conceptualization of ethics, but working with bodies as us, bodies as ourselves, as subjects. So, and here I'd like to propose you a kind of reversal of the traditional primacy that is being given to material condition over at the expense of reproductive rights in a number also of social justice agenda. And in order to do so, I'm going to borrow these words from Dorothy Akenova, who is a sexual rights activist from Nigeria. She says, if a Nigerian woman dares to ask for an orgasm, who knows, maybe next she'll demand clean water. I'm really going to conclude with this brief quote from Rosa Campbell, who is a PhD in history candidate from Cambridge University, that she wrote in this article from Literary Hub website at the aftermath of the overturning, this last summer overturning of the Roe v. Wade in the US. This was an article just discussing and narrating a number of examples taken from what women have been, the experiences of abortion, getting even illegal abortion in the pre-Roe v. Wade scenario, and the distances that they had to overcome, together with the many other difficulties, to actually enjoy their rights to their bodies, essentially. So this is an archive of a plain truth. It contours and colors what the World Health Organization states as a fact. Abortion rates do not go down when abortion is illegal, but abortion becomes more difficult and dangerous. These stories tell me, despite the danger, the long distances, the terror, and yes, the risk to our lives, we have always had abortions. We always will. And I thank you so much for your attention so far, and look forward for any comments and questions. And these are some of my contact details. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rossella. Thanks a lot for your incredible talk. I think Luca is here and is gonna handle the question and answer part, but there are a lot of comments, really, and are continuing. People are continuing to write down notes, and while you were talking, so it's a really, yeah. Please write down in the chat box, because the system here is not settled in a way that you may intervene directly. Unfortunately, is something that was not settled by us. So people that wants to make comments, please just write down, and I will take note, and then I will let Rossella know your questions. So I will start with some of the questions that are there. There are many comments, but there are also some questions. Basically, your talk were just, there is an ongoing discussion that was really an incredible thread of communication here. But there are a couple of questions for you. I just go on and write a couple of them. One is basically a comment, quite, an important one. Imagine the woman who are raped and become pregnant. Is this still considered intentional murder? This is Kyla for you, Rossella. Yeah.
So yeah, this is actually the usual example that is brought to the attention when what is under debate is the restrictive law, and especially in the US. I mean, the kind of restriction have to do always also with this basic decision. So are we stating what is at stake is exactly just making a decision over the more or less appropriateness, okay, of the very decision to end a pregnancy. So being raped has been one of the, excuses that have been at least accepted in a number of states in the US, just to name, to make an example, that have been used to, create the possibility to not ban abortion at all, but just creating some exemptions. So I can see that being raped is one of the very few cases that in the most restrictive states are being used to make an exception and to allow women to get an abortion. But yes, I appreciate the idea of connecting being raped with an intentional murder, because, and I would even add to what Kyla said, that maybe rape is never immediately seen as intentional, because very often it is also seen in a number of trials. So at a legal level, it is seen as something that maybe was the product of a mental illness. So people who actually may rape other people may be considered mentally ill and not responsible for their actions. On the other hand, it's exactly the very harsh irony that getting an abortion, so getting an abortion over your own body within some specific temporal limitation, is seen as perfectly intentional. So yeah, it's a very crucial aspect and very, frightening.
Yeah. Thank you. And there is, I think, another even more crucial question for you from Alexandria, who said, it's so disturbing that women are being forced to have a certain number of children. Why do women have to constantly be punished for simply having reproductive organs? Yeah.
Exactly. This was what I was trying to stress at the beginning of my presentation, when I was comparing, our ability to recognize the multifunctionality of the mouth, for instance. So the mouth can do many things. So we do not merely associate the mouth only with eating or only with our capacity to play some musical instruments. Whereas when it comes to genitals, when it comes to the belly, I would say even when it comes to breasts, there's an immediate connection to the reproductive potentials. So I would say that this is a kind of strong also Christian heritage in depicting those genitals as part of our most intimate organs, but very intimate because they are supposed to be only reproductive related organs. So yeah, that's women being told how many children they should have is a very clear and usual biopolitical policy that is used everywhere for national identity building.
Yeah, and there are a couple of questions that are about the mental health, consequences. One of those questions is from Bali, who said there should be more mental health for women going through this. Who decided, the government or the individual hospitals, doctors?
It's different in different countries. So I tried, for instance, to discuss the case of Italy and, for instance, the case in the US. So in the US, even when Roe v. Wade was still in place, there have been a number of restrictions in different states, and some of these restrictions had to do with keeping a mandatory counseling for any woman that asked for an abortion. Whereas in Italy, the existing law prescribes, after receiving the certificate of pregnancy, so it prescribes the 7-day reflection period. So during these 7 days, women are supposed to follow and to take their time until they make their decision. But first of all, if their physical conditions are dramatic, they are not required by law to continue to wait until the 7th day. And what is more important, because it really is about all of us as psychologists, as counselors, and the clinical professionals, what's our role there? Because once the hospital enforces actually psychological counseling, not even for women, but even for also including their partners, even as a violation of the norm, is really an ethical question for us, for our profession. What are we actually doing there? Are we actually working for the sake, as we should, deontologically, professionally, for the sake of our patients' well-being, or are we actually fitting with somebody else's agenda, which could be the hospital policy or even the governmental policy? So in Italy, there is no requirement, for instance, no requirement of a psychological counseling unless it's a woman's decision to ask for it. And even furthermore, the partner is involved in this counseling only after the woman has accepted so. So it's different in different countries.
Yeah. I see. Yeah, so there are some questions, one after another. Yeah, this one, maybe it's very crucial. How do you think we may move forward with the overturn, considering the major factor of baby formula shortage? From Jeremiah.
So what can we do? How can we move on after the overturning? Well, yeah. I would say, yeah, it's a very not only controversial, hot question, but really frightening, because I did want to introduce my presentation today by really extending the stake. We are not merely discussing about what women and people with the ability to get pregnant have been denied in terms of reproductive rights in the US. What we are discussing is really what is the nature of our citizenship. So are we still citizens in a country where it has been put black on white as a law, or lack of regulation, that actually we are not protected in our own decision over our own existence? If we exist only as embodied people, where is the space of citizenship? So I think that I really don't know how actually to answer to this very important question. What I can say is that we should not merely keep on thinking, working on the level of reproductive rights, but really thinking further on. What's the relationship between people and the state? That I think that a very important and very disruptive phenomenon happened this summer, and this happened in the US, but it's something that is also very telling for the worldwide situation.
Yeah, you're totally right. And there is another, I think, very much linked with what you are discussing. Another question from Gabrielle, who is saying, why do men feel obligated to make rules and decisions over parts they don't even have on their body? Is this something that will always continue to happen? How can we collectively improve condition for women?
Yes. So this is always a challenging and tricky question that I won't avoid. I won't avoid to deal with that. So yes, men. So we are talking in this case of cisgender men are not directly experiencing, at least embodiedly, pregnancy, and not even the difficulty to get an abortion. That's very true. But I would not, use to me, it's an essentialist argument, the one according to which men should not have a say at all. So one thing is saying that only men are in charge of a legislation that bans abortion for women. So only those men that could never experience what actually means to get an abortion or get a pregnancy. So this is one thing that I could agree and I could be sympathetic with. The other, there's also another side of the coin, because we can experience, we can share, we can discuss with somebody else something that we do not directly experience, and this is enriching. That's why, for instance, intersectionality can happen, because I can talk about women and I can talk about white women, but I also talk about women of color issues together with women of color, without a mutual exclusion of who is entitled, because under an intersectional perspective, we can really meet at the crossroads and discuss different layers of this. So what I would say is that for sure there's something to think upon the fact that in most countries, it's especially men, but unfortunately, as in the case of the US Supreme Court, there was also a woman approving the overturning of this historical decision. So that's why it's a little bit tricky question, the one that merely intends to exclude totally cisgender men from the discussion, because that could be a fruitful dialogue by recognizing who are the people mostly involved in this topic. There are, of course, women and people with the ability to get pregnant, but without totally excluding men, because as we saw with the overturning of the Roe v. Wade, and in a number of other cases in other countries, it's also women that are really an important part of getting this ban passing as laws in a number of countries.
Yeah.
Thank you for all the thoughtful questions.
There are so many other comments, but I am seeing also there are a couple of hands. There are people they want to make comments by asking something directly to you. I'm trying to make it possible by changing the cell here. Let's try, if in the very last minutes I can do it, because it's really hard to do something. But let's try with Sarah and Gordana. If you are, Gordana is still there. You may try, Gordana, right now. I have changed the set. Please try to open your mic, please. if you may. Otherwise, there is a lot of other questions for Rossella. Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's not really, yeah, maybe the system doesn't allow Gordana to ask directly, unfortunately. Anyway,
yeah.
Anyway, there is another, I think there is a lot of challenging question, Rossella. This is an incredible, very, very intense debate that's going on in the chat. There is a question for you. There are many doctors not treating miscarriage with care because of strict laws in the States. Will doctor be held accountable for this?
Yes, so all very difficult ones, thank you. So what I would say, first of all, is that there's, again, a lack of legislation in this sense. So if you take the example of Italy, it's the law itself that actually still keeps an open space, for instance, when it comes to the number of doctors, the number of conscientious objective doctors that every hospital can contain. So this is already an issue, but this is an issue already since the beginning. So that has to do with how the law has been written. So the law itself in Italy does not prescribe, does not enforce anything with respect to, restricting the number of conscientious objectors, until the point that right now the rising number of conscientious objectors all over Italy is almost at the point of overcoming doctors that are available to provide abortion. So you can really reach this kind of scenario. So there is, first of all, a lack of clarification at the legislation level. And then I think that there should be a very important discussion, I would say, also at the level of our scientific associations, such as, for instance, the American Psychological Association in this case, because it's really something that should be tackled, as it has to do with also possible, subsequent mental health implication for women that are denied abortion. Because if in general there has been a lack of research regarding abortion in itself, the few studies, as I said, that have been trying to draw this cause-effect relationship between a safe abortion and consequent mental illness for women who got abortion didn't prove methodologically very relevant and valid. So we need also more research in order to really test, in order to see how much we as psychologists, as healthcare providers, how are we actually taking care of our population, of our patient? Because at the present level, there is no clarity in the law in many countries. There is somehow requirement for psychological counseling, but no clear consequences for such psychological counseling, especially when it comes to women with dramatic physical condition, such as the one that I discussed with the Italy case study.
Okay, there is another super interesting question from Camilla. In recent discussion in Latin America, even transgender women have been excluded from the discussion on abortion due to their inability to become pregnant. To what extent does abortion move the boundaries of what it means to be a woman?
Thank you, Camila, for this question. Okay, so here we need another hour to answer this question. So this is a very good question, because it really, yes, pushes us to think about what is abortion including? Is it still including only cisgender women, or is it also including, that's why I call them people with the ability to get pregnant. People with the ability to get pregnant could be transgender men, or could be queer women. So it depends on how we classify them. So I would say that yes, so far it is still, the agenda is still very, very prominently covered by women and women's freedom of choices, and it has not yet including the transgender women and especially queer women. I guess because abortion has been one of the most important point in the women's movement agenda across the history, and it's still part of that kind of agenda. But I do agree that we need more research on transgender women that have the capacity to get pregnant and that are not yet enough included in this debate. Thank you, Camila. But it goes even farther from this answer, but unfortunately, yeah, I can go further on right now.
Yeah, also because time flies and we have already 1 hour. Our time is going to end and then I have to resume. Thank you very much, Rossella, for your incredible talk. There is really, we need to let's say at least a couple of hours more.
Yeah,
no, it's a lot of other comments, a lot of other questions. Yeah, so it's a really hot topic. Thanks for providing us with this arena of discussion, and we really hope to have you back soon in this let's say in the webinar series of American Psychological Association.
That would be a pleasure. That would be my pleasure. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yeah. So thanks to you all that are here for your participation, for your active participation, and on behalf of Division 52 Webinar Committee, we really want to give you have your feedback on this webinar. So please provide feedback of this discussion, and also enjoy the rest of the day, of course, and we will resume the webinar series next year. And in the meantime, please enjoy your winter break, having rest, having fun, and we'll see you next year.
We will. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye. See you. Bye-bye.